All right, well, Lang Clan, welcome to another interview in our target language series so that we can get you further towards your 90% target language goals, or maybe even 100 if you're feeling brave. We have today the wonderful Janina, who has a ton of experience teaching on 3 different continents and many years in various classroom settings, and especially in a year like this year, a ton of great ideas for how you can still continue your goals in a crazy year like teaching during COVID. So we're going to jump right in by turning it over to Janina. Can you tell us a little bit about your classroom experience and where you are at right now in your teaching journey?
Certainly. I started teaching in 1994. I filled in for someone's sabbatical leave for a year. That was Spanish, high school Spanish. And after that, I wanted to travel, and I went to Asia for 1 year, and I taught English in Seoul, Korea. And while I was there, I got hired by a university to be a language instructor. And I ended up staying for 3 years. It was an amazing experience. So I taught sort of bachelor level classes where, foreign language requirements, being English in this case, the students had to take a few years of English. And I also, during our university breaks, taught a language immersion school for primary age students. And after that experience finished, I decided I really enjoyed international teaching, and I went to work for an international teaching organization where I've taught languages as well as drama and high school English and middle school English in just outside of Tokyo, Japan for 5 years. And I've been living and teaching in Cambridge, England. And then summers, my language summers, Paris, Lyon, France, Madrid, etc. So languages are pretty much, learning and teaching languages are pretty much my life. So
the bread and butter. So you've been all over. That's awesome. So you're currently in Cambridge teaching?
That's right. Yep.
Awesome. So how has it been? Are you in your first week back right now?
The kids come back next week.
Okay.
Yeah, so they'll come back face to face. I think much of the United States and schools, a lot of schools everywhere, if they were not just, everyone was doing some kind of version of remote learning, I think, and we were certainly doing that. But I know that you had asked me about doing things a little bit differently this year, so that's certainly been on my mind. I always start the first 2 weeks of school Harry Wong. Now, I'm going to make a confession here. When I went to school, when I got my bachelor's degree, I have a bachelor's degree in theater arts and one in foreign languages. And then when I became a teacher during the summers, I did a Master of Arts in the teaching of languages in Spain. So I say this because I didn't do a student teaching experience. I kind of did an alternative certification sort of thing, where I was learning on the job, and I had some mentoring and that kind of thing, and, a lot of trial and error. So when the short amount of time that I worked at a school district in the States, Harry Wong came in. They hired Harry Wong to come there the first days of school. So he gave a 2-day workshop, of course. And, I love him because he says, everything is common sense. And he said so many interesting and things that still resonate with me all these years later. You get the routines and procedures down, and everything will just flow into place. And I thought, this is perfect for languages, because then we get to do it all, use comprehensible input, target language training in our room, empujen las sillas, or, the calendar, all of those things we can spend so much time on, puedo ir al baño, all of those things to just function in the class, and they're absorbing language like sponges, and they're having fun. So this year I thought, okay, I'm not even, there's all these rules that I'm feeling a bit insecure about, if I'm really honest with you, because this is new, isn't it? I've never had to combat a virus. Think about that. You think about getting sick all the time, because we do as teachers, but it not like this. So how do I make that a language lesson and make it effective? And so to be honest with you, the first thing I did is I started Googling. I thought, okay, I could make them. I could make all these materials, or I could go on Teachers Pay Teachers, or find a good colleague who's already put the work in, because the genius really comes when we all sort of share that stuff together, I think, you know. And don't reinvent the wheel, have a life. Don't be at school, you know, don't spend your life at school unless you want to, of course, but I don't. I love schooling kids, but I don't want to spend my life at school. And so I went and I found somebody who did a bunch of basically PowerPoint stuff that I could adapt, so that I'll be able to put that into my routines, and we'll practice, you know, pónganse la mascarilla, you know, we'll do all of that and keep practicing it over and over as part of Harry Wong's routines.
That's great. That book also transformative for my teaching experience as well. And I have a blog post that I send a lot of my audience to that's all about like the first day of school and how important that is. And it's like all about that kind of stuff, and the idea that the students are the ones who have all the energy, and they're the ones who should be doing most of the work as long as you set up those routines. And I think that's a really great segue to the idea that you can use a lot of those common sense routines. You can just do them in the target language.
Yep.
And that idea of just the repetition of it will make it a really powerful experience for language learning. That's really cool.
And put some drama in there. That was another thing.
Ooh,
you know,
I didn't
have training in language teaching, but I was an actress and a writer. So I used that automatically. I thought, okay, I know how to be in a play. I know how to memorize everything that's in a play. We'll try that technique, you know, but on a smaller scale, sort of dialogues and that kind of thing. And so that I ham it up a lot with those routines. You know, they pretend to be the teacher, I'm the student, you know, they have to ask, everyone has to ask, everyone plays a student and teacher, that kind of thing. So it'll look different because there's going to be a lot less movement. I use a lot of movement, but I can't have that now. Not right now.
And it's probably going to have to be something that, you know, teachers work through on a day-by-day basis. Every day is going to bring something new. So it's going to require a whole new level of flexibility for us, I'm sure.
Yep.
And with that level of flexibility, I'm sure that you've experienced this before, especially as you were kind of thrown into lots of new teaching situations. You know, new things are by no means something surprising to you. What was it like with your first year teaching? What were some fears you had around using a lot of target language? And what was something you did to get over it?
I definitely had some fears for sure. But I have to tell you, I don't know if my experience is different than obviously it is. It's unique. We all have a unique experience. But, you know, I had a lot of fears in making mistakes and that sort of stuff, you know, using language all the time. With that said, I had kind of already, I don't want to say worked through some of those fears. You know, I had a situation, I was in New Mexico. We moved out to New Mexico when I was young. And when I was in college, by the time I got to upper level Spanish, the people in my Spanish class were all native speakers. And so that was a great way to learn, but it was also really humbling and humiliating, if I'm really honest with you, at that time, because I felt like I didn't have that ease of expression. They were so intelligent. And I remember kicking myself a little bit because I'm thinking, like, how did they learn that? And of course, now I know they're from Mexico. That's how they know that, you know, and they've got their struggles too. But at that time, so I was able to kind of work through some of that stuff before I became a teacher. I had a very different audience than that, I think is what I'm trying to say, of people who I probably, you know, knew more than. I did know more Spanish than they did. But it was, are you using, you know, thinking about all those mistakes. And one thing, and I don't know if you have this experience, you know, because I think we both speak French and Spanish. French has this, in my opinion, can have this reputation for being a little bit harder than Spanish, and it couldn't be less true.
True.
And it's you know, the commands are easier in French. They're so much harder in Spanish. You know, you've got to remember all the stem changes. It took me a really long time to really master that. So I worried about things like that. Am I using the right command form? Am I, you know, I was pretty critical of myself because I felt like, I really felt like I wanted to speak with the ease of expression that I had in English. And I ended up getting to that point, certainly, in my Spanish. And it was a very concerted effort. It wasn't easy, but yeah.
I'm glad that you speak to that, because I think that everybody feels that way, that in the frustration of being the leader of a language classroom, you want to be able to have that ease of expression that you have in English and be that model for students. But the truth is that if you're not a native speaker, and even if there's many different labels and levels of proficiency and all that good stuff, that honestly, at the end of the day, something that we all have to realize is that they don't need a perfect speaker. They need somebody who's at least at a certain level. And when you make mistakes, it can be a very transformative experience for students watching you make a mistake and how you catch yourself and correct yourself. And I think that, in this whole conversation about target language, I think it's really powerful to address that fear right away, because I have yet to meet a language teacher who hasn't at least mentioned it at some point that well, I would love to, but what if I make a mistake in front of my students? And listen, teachers, we've all been there. We've all felt that in front of a class. And one of the nice things, one of the tiny silver linings, one of the opportunities that you and I kind of talked about with being in a virtual learning environment is that we do actually have a little bit more control and a little bit more pace in a virtual lesson. You can actually control the language a lot more in terms of what you're putting into a digital resource, what you get from a resource that you're curating from, a colleague or TPT or whatever. You actually have a lot more control of what language is in there. There's not quite as much pressure for you to produce all of this output all of the time for your students. You can get it from other places.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And with that said, I'm glad that you bring up that point, because that input doesn't all have to come from you speaking. Remember, we have those 3 modes of communication. So interpretive. So if you get from a colleague a slideshow that's all CI in the target language, they're still getting that. If they're reading, they're getting that CI, because they can slow down and they can look things over. They can, extract vocabulary. They can read at their own pace. It's not like having a conversation. So all of those things count. It's not just necessarily you having a conversation with them. But I also do want to say that one of the things that I learned in my journey towards sort of native level Spanish, and there was a reason I did that, a very conservative reason, that first year's experience of having some self-doubt. But it doesn't matter what you're teaching, whether it's languages or not. I think you're going to have some self-doubt as a first-year teacher. And then mine was a bit double, because I didn't have all that training that I think so many of you go into, which is great. I kind of got that on the job. But as I told you, when I taught in Seoul, I used to run this language immersion program. And so it was, teaching content through languages. So now, mind you, when I was teaching English,
Oh no, our connection got paused.
that was with my university students, or qualification to do Spanish immersion, I had to have a native level of Spanish. So I went through that from advanced mid, I think, is the first test that I took, and it wasn't good enough, and I had to keep going back. And it was a long journey. When you get up to those levels, into the advanced level, to advance up to advanced, high, and superior, it's difficult. But I have to say that it's really worth it in so many ways. It's worth it because you'll have so much fun getting there. And we can talk about that in a second, about ways, really fun ways for people to get language professional development that they're not from a university, I'll tell you that. And then the ease of expression that you get. So yes, if you have more proficiency than the students, they're getting higher quality input from you. But the more that you can do, the easier it is. I mean, I haven't for years had to think about, how do I say this? How do I say that? I can concentrate on making everything CI in my target language, because I don't have to think about the words. But I've been the other side too. I've been,
Our connection got a little fuzzy. So could you, I hate to do this to you, but could you give us like another quick summary of the last thing that I heard, and just in case it didn't record, was
yeah,
when you started teaching the immersion program content based in Seoul, and you were
yeah,
talking about how you didn't have quite as much training as most teachers do.
right, right.
Just want to make sure
So
everybody gets the good story.
I when I taught in Seoul, I taught at a university. So my university students, adults, and I taught a language immersion school, which is all teaching content through language. You teach content and language at the same time. And I was a coordinator, and I would have these people, these different wonderful teachers that would come and teach for a month. So we used to have sort of 4 classes, and we would do maybe English and art, or it really depended on the specialty of the people I had, because the content was secondary, really. It was the experience in language. And when I decided to come work for the organization I work for now, I decided to get a qualification in what's called Spanish language immersion. So it's, K through 8, you would have a 1st grade classroom or a 5th grade classroom, and you would teach in most of the day or part of the day in Spanish. And you had to prove with an ACTFL OPI that you were a near native speaker at the very least. So that was difficult. So the first time I did the ACTFL OPI, got like an advanced mid. I mean, and it was way below what I needed. And so that kind of set me on a journey to being able to speak Spanish like a native. And it wasn't, I can't even say it was a personal passion. It was just sort of like, okay, this will make my life easier. This will make my job easier. And it turned into a personal passion because I figured out I learned so much about languages, about really hitting those high levels. And then the rewards were just outstanding because I don't ever feel like I don't know the answer. And I can concentrate 100% on CI. I can make everything I do CI. I feel like I don't even really need materials necessarily, or the slides. But don't be shy about relying on that stuff. And you guys are so lucky. If anybody, there's so many colleagues out there that are making things that you can use and adapt to you, which is fantastic. And I mean, I didn't have that when I first started teaching. We didn't have all this connectivity. So.
Oh yeah. Wow. That's a really powerful story too. I mean, an advanced mid, that's just an incredible achievement on its own. I've taken a couple ACTFL OPIs and they are no joke.
I had to, you had to get advanced, high, or superior. But what was another great thing about going through the training is it gave me a really solid foundation on what proficiency levels mean. So now I know how to translate that to my students. I know how to say, okay, we're going to go from this level, we're going to go from here to here. And this is how much time we have. Okay, boom, this is how we're going to do it. And I feel really confident being able to do it. And it wasn't, I don't feel like I'm guessing, and it follows the same trajectory. You learn words, you learn phrases, you start making your own sentences, you make choppy sentences. They start looking like paragraphs. You have choppy paragraphs, you have solid paragraphs, you have good, strong paragraphs, you have connected paragraphs, and then you have extended speech. So when you think of it like that, and we don't deal with that upper level at all. So you don't need that as most language teachers at school. You wouldn't need that. You wouldn't find really any purpose to use that. So you're really dealing with the novice level in most school situations. So they're going from nothing to being able to make their own sentences. Mm-hmm. And the sentences don't even have to be great. You know what I mean? They don't have to be terribly polished. They just have to have some basic communication skills. And that's usually at like year 3, So.
And you said that you're teaching, if I remember correctly, you're teaching Spanish 1 through AP this year, right?
Yep.
So what does that look like when I know I get asked a lot, and something we talked about a lot when I was teaching Spanish in our department was, how do we know that they're ready for the next level? And like, honestly, the whole contract of levels is a little bit artificial, but we gotta have something, right? We gotta have something. So how do you know when you're working in your curriculum or however you set it up, what's that indicator that helps get them from like 2 to 3 or 3 to 4? What are you looking for?
Yeah. So really, level 1, of course, by the end, I would say, because you make faster progress, you make the fastest progress in the novice level, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it takes about twice as long to make the same amount of progress in the intermediate level, right? And really at school, even up to AP, because they call it pre-advanced, high intermediate or whatever, you're only dealing with mostly that novice level. So to go from 0 to being able to make some phrases, I feel like is that's really like level 1, and then level 2 can be, some parts of it can be pretty painful, with the grammar, which I believe in. I do some old school things and because they work.
Mm-hmm.
Verb charts, that kind of thing. I'm not afraid of old fashioned learning.
I don't think anybody's really a purist, right? Like, I don't really think there's any such thing as like a true language teacher purist or whatever. Everybody kind of mixes it together.
Yeah. And then, so like level 3 would be, they would really be going from that sort of high novice level into the intermediate. Now, mind you, there's lots of, if you have an advanced track class, which I know we're not really supposed to do that kind of thing, but I know some schools still have programs that, the students who are really motivated and they love it and they want to go,
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty of schools that have programs like that, but then there's plenty of schools that have one program kind of for everybody. I mean, that's just the reality, right? So it can be done very quickly to get from 0 to intermediate. So when students are, by the end of Spanish 3, they are intermediates, which means they can create with languages, right? So novice level students is just, they're kind of regurgitating, learned things, but then they have enough of those learned things to move it into, to create. And that's the hallmark of an intermediate. And so then the magic that happens in level 3, it's beautiful. The beginning of the year, everyone's a little insecure. And then by the end of the year, people are not perfect, but confident communicators. And then to go from there to what I would normally recommend is that students, if you've got an extra, if you're going to be a senior, I always recommend to students that they would just do AP, because that can be like free college money. And the language classes, the language APs, because they have a lab component and they tend to are equivalent to a couple of upper level classes. I've seen people get 18 credits out of it, 15, 9, 12. I mean, astounding number of college credits. So like, why don't you go? What's the worst thing that can happen? I mean, you get a 2 or something. But if students are going to be juniors, I would tell them, okay, take Spanish 4, because we do tons of reading, and it's really like Spanish for pleasure. It's just total immersion. We do those 6 global themes that you see sort of throughout, and learning about the environment. I do a lot of things with guest speakers. I have a lot of guest speakers from around the world come talk to my students like this. We can talk about that. That's actually really easy to set up, and it's really fun. Food, immersive lessons, that kind of thing, and to really enjoy what you've learned. Pleasure reading, games. Well, I do games throughout all my levels because I'm very selfishly, and they're not only good for learning, they lower affect, which will get kids communicating. And I really didn't want to be the lady who taught hard classes all the time and everyone was mad at me, but I wasn't going to lower my standards. So I thought, okay, we'll just do games, We'll do lots and lots of games, and they work. And then AP would be sort of like pre-intermediate. So really, not pre-advanced. So really, to get like a passing score, a 3, a student would have to be able to speak pretty effectively in paragraphs. But let me remind you, paragraphs can be 2 or 3 strong sentences together, right? And then maybe a native speaker who's done some study of Spanish might get a 5, and they would speak in really pretty extended paragraphs. So I listen for that. So I said a lot of words, but I listen for that. So I listen for, okay, novice. Once you get out of the novice range, you can create with language. And as you progress, you can do it stronger, right? And if you can do it up here, this intermediate high level, this pre-advanced, then you can do AP. And I would obviously tell a kid to, skip. A lot of times in my situation, I tell kids not to skip, not because I expect them to do a particular sequence. I want them to get lots of college credits, because a lot of colleges, the difference between getting no college credit for a 3, but you spend another year in Spanish or French and you get 12 credits. That's didn't mean anything to high school students necessarily, but for teachers, I'm sure it does. And it's great to be able to share that with families. Like, that's a whole semester of college that you don't have to worry about now. So
yeah, I know I benefited from that system.
oh,
From
yeah, oh,
taking
nice.
lots of APs. Yeah, it definitely works.
Yeah, yeah.
So you talked a lot about, especially when you're moving students from those different levels, how do you incorporate the routines that we talked about earlier in order to
Yep.
get that language to them? Like, what kind of routines do you have, and what do
Mhm.
those look like, especially in the beginning of the year?
Okay, so do you want to give me a level and I can
Let's do level
I can
3. Let's do level
Okay.
3. What does level 3
So,
look like?
so level 3 students would really understand those because they would have been with me. And if they're new, the other ones will teach them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my routines, I usually do one thing for vocabulary, not for culture, but, levántense, por favor. And we do, juro, lealtad a la bandera. It's great vocabulary for students to learn the Pledge of Allegiance in Spanish, and we do the calendar. And these routines are really drawn out early on because they're still learning. So I use my calendar to teach days, months, weather, and I do it every day. So if you do the weather and days, by the time you get to that unit, do this in French obviously too. By the time you get to that unit, they do a couple of fun projects. They love it. It's so easy. You give them some handouts, and by that point, they know it because you've done it every single day. And then there's so many questions you can incorporate, ¿Qué día fue ayer? ¿Qué día será mañana? Whatever you get yesterday, you get past tense, you get all that in there. So I really embellish that. And then at the very beginning of the year, I really embellished all the survival stuff in class, Puedo ir al baño, and everyone acts it out. But by level 3, they know that, and I would have them be different leaders. And sometimes, honestly, because I've had them, they've got the routine down of not either just my Spanish class, but the whole deal that this is foreign language class. And if the phone rings, they'll start doing it, they'll start, because they have to do it. We didn't do that today. And it's
That's awesome.
silly, it's fun, it's silly, it's lighthearted, but it's also, I sneak a lot of language in there,
Yeah, that's really the power of routines, is that you can do that.
Yep.
Can you walk us through, what's one of your favorite games to use with your upper level classes?
My upper level classes or my lower? Okay, I'm going to start with one of my lower level classes, even though that's not what you asked for, and then I'm going to tell you about an upper level one. So one of my lower level fun games, I have a lot of Guess Who games. Do you know that Guess Who, where you ask,
yeah,
does the person have a mustache? Do they have this? Do they have that? And I made these cards. So they've got pictures on them that has the language. So it's totally CI, right? Mm-hmm. So after we've done some work on descriptions, right? And I wouldn't do a lecture. I would make it's very CI. I show them, PowerPoint, opposites, tall and short, and that kind of thing. They work in pairs as teams against each other with the card, right? With Guess Who, so that they can help each other. They have some support. And they do that, and then I divide them up and they have to play against each other. And then after they've had a class full of practice, the quiz is they have to take the quiz. The quiz is playing the game without the card. And by then they know it all, and it's all in context. So that's a really fun game, but that does take some prep. So some of my instant games for upper level, we'll start there. So I love playing this game with errors. So if I have a test, I give a test. I do this a lot in my 4 class and my AP class. It's really quite fun. I write down all the errors, a bunch of errors that they make. Okay. Now you have to have a group that one of the most important things, I think, in establishing a strong community language class is for everybody to feel comfortable enough to make errors. So that's where the games, the affect, the CI, what you were talking about, with them seeing you make a mistake, that it's a community. That couldn't be more important. That's your community. So we tend to make the same errors at the same time in our journeys, right? That's research based. So I would write down their errors, and I don't tell them what's what, and I give them all this sort of fake money, but you can do anything you want. You don't have to do it for a prize. The kids like to do it with checks. They just like to play it. And so then I would write down one of their errors, and then they all have to write down the correction, and they all guess, who is it? Ooh, that one was mine. And it's all grammar in context. So, you might see something like tu via, like they've mixed the preterite and the imperfect, or you could see, gender mistakes, because that takes a long time for them to really stop making those mistakes. So gender and number. And then they get a point or a check or a euro or whatever you want to give them. And it's a very fun way to deal with all the errors on your tests.
I love that. What a great new spin on that. And I think it's also really powerful to re-mention what you said too, because that's something that I know I talk a lot about too, is that we're super SLA nerds over in my community, and something we talk about a lot is the whole idea of like the morpheme orders of acquisition. And that's exactly true, is that you're gonna make certain errors at certain points in your language journey. And one of the things that is really powerful to know is that gender errors are going to continue up until your AP level students. Teachers still make them. I still make them. It's going to be a thing. And it's what's a better way to do that than to make a game out of it and just make it cool that everybody does this, and let's recognize it and make something fun out of it. What a great way to do that. I love that.
So, and then I have a lot of instant games. I know I don't know if I listed all of them in, I put together a guide. It was 5 weeks of fun, and I organized them by like a similar activity or one activity in ways it would look like in the novice level A, the intermediate level B, and the advanced level C. So most of them, they're low prep, so I think they're fairly instant, and I think that's important to have a good bag of tricks when you're a language teacher, that you can just pull out. I mean, Post-its are great. You should have a bunch of Post-its on hand, big ones, small ones, because there's a bunch of instant games. You got any little bells, those make instant games. Anything, any little whiteboards, all of that can turn any little activity, and it can kind of gamify it. And I haven't researched completely the science behind it, but I do know that, that releases dopamine and pleasure, and they start to really associate it with fun stuff. And as I said, very selfishly, I didn't want everyone to hate my class. If I was going to come to school all day, I did not want everyone to hate I hate this. This is hard, because it kind of is, right? Foreign language. So I have to make it fun. How do I make it fun? So
yeah, you're always going to remember something better when it's fun. And Janina has all of this for us in a really great handout. There's tons of activities on there, like she said, broken down by exactly what level you are teaching based on what level of proficiency that you are targeting. And it's got all kinds of goodies in there for you. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We're so grateful to have that guide, and we are so grateful to have you here with us today. This has been such a joy. We're going to have you come back on again and share some more fun with us.
Thank you, Devin. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this was great. And I wish you the best of luck with your new semester, and I hope that it goes as well as it possibly can, and that I know you're a killer teacher and you'll be able to handle everything that comes your way, and that we are wishing the best for you. But thank you so much for your time today, and we will see you again next time.
Thanks, Devin.
Bye.
Bye.